Oh my goodness. I don't have my lights on. Life is just sucking today, but it's going to be okay. Hi, you guys. Welcome to True Crime and Woo. As you know, we're going to talk about a true crime story, and then we're going to have a meditation that's going to kind of help you a little bit to release that negative energy and things like that. I started this process because of the fact that it is so intense when we're dealing with these true crime stories that I feel like that a little meditation is what's needed in order to kind of clear the air, if you will. So that's my thinking, that's where we're at, and that's what we're going to do. Today's case is a little sad. I'm going to tell you right up front, it's a tough one. And I'm not, real excited about telling it, but it is a story that, sorry, my glasses are driving me nuts. It is a story that it should be told. And it's the story of a young lady named Kelsey Briggs. Kelsey is two, just two. Um, in my opinion, there was frequent child abuse, and basically the system failed this child entirely. It's just a very sad way of living, and she had a very sad life. But she does deserve, her story does need to be told. So, the child abuse of Kelsey Briggs is one of the worst I have ever seen or heard of. There's no doubt in my mind that somebody abused this poor baby. No question about it. Her parents, her grandparents, and the Oklahoma DHS system all contributed to this abuse, in my opinion. There's a lot of he said, she said in this case, and some of you'll just have to determine the believability for yourself. So at the beginning of this case, Kelsey's dad, Lance Briggs, and Lance's mother portrayed him as a war hero and an upstanding man of the community and just a wonderful dad and, all of this stuff. Further investigation, though, revealed much of that to be untrue. I'll just tell you that right up front. So there's many facts, quote unquote facts, that many dispute. But none of these disputes make any difference in the fact that Michael Porter, Radon Briggs, and the systemic failure of the Child Protective Services of Oklahoma DHS actually murdered Kelsey Briggs. That's my opinion. So there's some players that, of course, are involved in this, and I want to kind of go through a few of them. There's a lot of people that were involved, but we're going to narrow this down to just a few. I've read many court transcripts, books, articles about this case. Some were true, some actually manipulated facts, and some are just considered plain out lies, in my opinion. Truthfully, all the information I found could fill a good Law and Order SVU episode. But this case was, of course, in a small town in Oklahoma instead, not in, New York or Manhattan. There's no more horrible, no more irreparable story than that of Kelsey Smith Briggs. This is a quote I'm giving you by Barry John, who was an investigative reporter. And he wrote an article called The Murder and Exploitation of Kelsey Smith Briggs for the U.S. Observer in 2017. And the quote goes on to say, the unnecessary death of a child pains and shocks communities to the core. And its effects ripple into lives distant and unconnected. We hold our own children more closely than we demand answers. And that's a very, very good quote. And if you'll excuse me, I've got to turn this light off. I think that's part of my problem. The light is bothering me. It may not be bothering you guys, but it's terribly bothering me. And I'm sorry. This is very unprofessional, and I apologize. We'll fix it real quick. So from the very beginning, the family, of course, drew some battle lines, right? And, there was this side and that side, and he said and she said, and it was just amazing, all the different things that came about from this. Let's see if this helps. Oh, yes, that's much better. Thank you. So, they drew the battle lines. Many people are directly affected by these events, if only on an emotional level, in my opinion. But coming through the noise is basically a standard list of characters, if you will, with basically 5 people involved. There's Kelsey, who is the victim. Now, Ray Dawn is Kelsey's mom, and Ray Dawn divorced her father before Kelsey was even born. And she had custody originally, with Lance having visitation rights. And Kelsey also spent time with her grandparents on both sides, of course, right? To make it a little less expensive in raising the kid, Ray Dawn went on welfare and lived with her mom and dad. She worked jobs, working with elderly, manufacturing, and took classes at Seminole State College. In 2004, after the death of her father, Ray Dawn and Kelsey moved into their own apartment, and she even won Miss Personality at the Shawnee Baby pageant, that little precious thing. For a time, things looked to be kind of looking up for Ray Dawn and Kelsey, right? Kathy Briggs. Now, Kathy is Lance's mom. And when Kelsey was born, Kathy is the one that pushed for a paternity test, not Lance. Lance didn't really want a whole lot to do with Kelsey, from all has been said, other than the standard every other weekend, type visitation. He didn't want custody, or he didn't want to show up for any hearings, any of that. And allegedly, he told others that he just wanted to move on with his life, right? Because, they were divorced, so, he just really didn't want any part of it. And he was kind of hoping that the baby would turn out not to be his. He was not that lucky. So, basically, Kathy is what is the epitome of the worst mother-in-law in the world, trust me. And personally, I wouldn't consider characterizations of loving father and wonderful man to fit Lance. Kathy pulled out all the stops to portray him as this wonderful, awesome person, but he showed his true colors. And according to court transcripts and things of that nature, Lance admittedly lied to the authorities about his military service and this actual incident that happened. Kathy, on the other hand, appeared to see the custody agreement, or lack thereof, to be affecting her access to Kelsey, and rightly so. So since Lance was going to be away in the military, his parents went to court asking for visitation rights for grandparents. A lot of grandparents do that. Not a big deal. So arrangements were made with the court that Kelsey's mom, Ray Dawn, and Lance's mom, Kathy Briggs, would meet at the court-designated place, which happened to be a gas station, to, exchange the baby. I honestly felt that there was a serious problem with Kathy's version of Kelsey's abuse, since there was really a total lack of evidence. It was more like anything that happened, she documented and thought that it was abuse. Now, don't misunderstand. Kelsey was abused, no question. But the ridiculous amount of documentation and videos that Kathy actually shows as abuse many times was just normal kids playing, like normal kids, falling down in the playground and things like that, and causing bruises, bumps and bruises, things like that. But I don't want to take anything away from the fact that Kelsey actually was abused and did suffer a great deal. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the little incidents that Kathy kept trying to get as abuse, and that drove me nuts. So, basically, Kathy Briggs has said that her precious son, God love his soul, bless his heart, as we say in the South, is not abusive. And later she said that Ray Dawn claimed she had lied about the abuse. This is not true. Kathy testified in court that Ray Dawn said, quote, he had taken the keys away because she wanted to go out, and she, Ray Dawn, had gotten upset. So she filed a police report and said that he had tried to choke her. And I got this from a court transcript. Now, what's more, Ray Dawn, according to Kathy, tried to get the charge dropped. But the officer told her she'd be in trouble for falsifying a report. Now, remember, this is all according to Kathy Briggs, so there's that. We can't find anything other than Kathy's word that this actually happened. Now, apparently, there were many incidents that happened during their marriage. Ray Dawn filed for divorce on May the 30th, 2002, and it was final on July 31st of 2002. And Kathy kind of expected the dejected grandparents' attitude was going to sway the nation when all of this came about. And so, allegedly she kind of took that meddlesome in-law concept to ridiculous proportions to include criminal actions. And she wants you to, just ignore that part. All of a sudden, you should call into question Kathy's records of actions and motives about Kelsey's mother, Radon Smith. So, you decide. I'm going to give you some of the things that happened, and you'll just have to decide if you believe that Kathy was, making it up, or if it was true or false. Because it's just difficult to say. So let's move on to number 3, who's Lance Briggs. Now, don't be misled here. In my opinion, Lance Briggs is a bad guy. He's a vicious physical abuser with tons of offenses on record. When Radon was pregnant in 2000, allegedly, Lance punched her in the abdomen repeatedly, causing a miscarriage. And there is, documentation of that. There were many incidents that required calling the police during their marriage, and the police advised Radon on several occasions to get a protective order. Radon filed charges on one visit by the police. The court ordered Lance to go to anger management classes. Now, ironically, this happened twice. Once for the assault on Radon, and once again for assault on his later girlfriend, Marie Larson. According to public records, Lance threw a fit because his McDonald's meal was not supersized and threw Radon against the wall and choked her with his arm. That was in May of 2002. What a jerk, right? Witness testimony described Lance repeatedly breaking into Radon's home, stealing and destroying items or leaving items later found in a nearby creek or field, right? And at that time, she had a protective order against him. But one time, Kathy brought back items to Radon that had been missing, but Lance said he didn't take them. Kind of makes you go, was it a mother and son team of harassment? Perhaps. He would leave notes asking for Radon, threatening her not to play games. Who's playing games here? Confused. This is when the police went ahead and arrested him. Now, don't forget the anger management classes he attended, right? Because those always work. And, of course, he'll never do it again, right? Yeah, okay. This is classic narcissistic behavior. Many abusers react the same way after an assault on their significant other. In fact, we could almost consider this sociopathic behavior. But you decide. Now, I do have a post about sociopathic behavior and psychopathic behavior you might want to check out, and I'll leave that in the show notes as well. But it's called The Psychology of Murder. And I've got a little quiz there that basically says, are you a sociopath or a psychopath? You can either take it for yourself, or, you can take it for your significant other or someone you are concerned about whether or not they're being a sociopath or a narcissist or whatever. Or you could take it about Lance, based on what you learn here, and see how it's rated. In my opinion, Lance is an abusive narcissist at the least. I believe he's a sociopath, but remember that sociopaths and psychopaths are not always violent, nor do they always murder people. Many psychopaths actually are CEOs of large companies. I mean, it's just amazing. They're fully functional. But anyway, I digress. So, speaking of Lance, let's talk about really what happened in the Army with Lance. So, remember that Kelsey's dad is Lance, and he appeared to be doing well at the time that Kelsey and her mom were doing pretty well. He had remarried a lady by the name of Ashley Lytle on June 14, 2003. They moved their wedding date up, in fact, to accommodate visitation dates so Kelsey could participate in the wedding and celebrations. Now, this kind of made me pause because I'm thinking if there was a good relationship between the mom and the dad, we wouldn't have to wait for the visitation date. We could make arrangements. I mean, my husband and his ex-wife, we became a team, and we would, raise the kids together. And so if there was something their mother wanted them to attend and it happened to be on his weekend, that was fine. We would easily accommodate them for that. So it just doesn't make sense to me that they had to move the wedding up to accommodate his weekend, unless there was a lot of tension there, and there was, believe me. Anyway, pretty baby was in the wedding, and that's very exciting. Court transcripts tell us that in 2003, Lance enlisted in the U.S. Army Reserve. and he became active duty in September of 2004. He was going to receive more training, and then he was going to Iraq, right? When Kelsey died, the authorities tried to call Lance with the terrible news, and they couldn't find him. They just couldn't find him. Here's the weird part. Over and over again, we've seen reports that Lance only found out about her death when he was getting off the plane from Iraq. He and his mother were lying. He was not in Iraq. Here's the truth. He was not fresh from Iraq, but he had been sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, to a drug rehab center. See, he tested positive for drugs, and, the Army doesn't like that very much. And so they told him, we're going to give you a dishonorable discharge, which is the worst you can get without a court-martial, if he didn't volunteer to attend this rehab center. And he also allegedly, get this, physically assaulted a superior officer in Germany. Now remember, because, the anger management classes really worked, right? Okay. So to me, this shows the level of lying that the Briggs is going to go. They wanted to play the sympathy card, poor us, it's all about us. And he was a great dad, and he's a wonderful person, and he was just fresh from Iraq, right? So they're going to try anything to tug on those heartstrings and to further the future of their agenda of revenge towards Radon. And it's ridiculous. Vengeance for the audacity of divorcing and filing charges against him as a domestic abuser. I'm certain that's it. In fact, it was reported that the marriage between Lance and Ashley was so awful that they were actually in the process of a divorce while Kelsey was being murdered. In fact, the divorce was final only 1 month after the death of Kelsey. It's got a pattern here, guys. Only a year prior to this arrest for child abuse, the police arrested Lance for another crime. He allegedly burglarized the home of a former girlfriend. At that time, he dragged the ex by her hair, and she had a friend with her, and he tossed her friend into the front yard. Police records show at that time he had a loaded gun. So now there's another protective order against him. This is a bad guy, a really bad guy. Don't buy his BS. And it makes me wonder. I wonder if the filing of the many charges and many protective orders makes any difference before courts consider it a pattern of abuse and violence. Trust me, he's no grieving innocent father. And why he was not charged in any way, it just breaks my heart, right? This is part of that systemic abuse all the way around for this poor child. Now let's talk about the mother. Radon Briggs. Now, she was no angel. Don't misunderstand me. And I do not believe for any sense of the imagination that she's innocent in all this. Let's just get that straight. But prior to January 2005, there's no reports to authorities, no signs of abuse, nor were there any abuse signs ever noticed by anybody close to her or her daycare. Life was wonderful. So it's with this nod to Radon's previous behavior that I'm willing to spend a few minutes and a few paragraphs basically describing her situation. I don't feel her marriage to Lance or anything else is an excuse for what happened to her daughter. But I hope to give you some basic information only to further show that Lance was not the big hero that he was supposed to be. Lance and Radon had a tumultuous marriage, no question. Lance's mom, Kelsey Briggs, portrays him as a calm, wonderful, upstanding man, but don't be misled. That is not true. He was an abusive person, physically and mentally. And it wasn't only to his wife, Radon, though she did get the brunt of it. Remember the officer that he also abused, basically. So court transcripts report that Radon Briggs filed a police report in May of 2001, and she alleged that Lance slammed her against a wall and placed his forearm up against her throat, quote unquote. And according to Radon, this was the incident about the McDonald's meal, right? At the time, the officer didn't see evidence of injuries. He did see evidence of injuries on her neck and her collarbone, where he had taken his arm and put up against her. Ironically, the divorce papers state Radon is not now pregnant, but we know that's not entirely true because she gave birth to Kelsey 5 months later in December 28, 2002, and she was a full-term baby. So according to reports, Lance was perfectly happy not being in Kelsey's life, as I've said, not paying child support. That is until his mother, Kathy, gets involved. So Kathy, on Lance's behalf, of course, asked for a DNA test to see if Lance was the father. In April of 2003, the results came back, and guess what? 99.99% chance. This is all according to court records. One last person we have to talk about that is party to this incident. I really even hate saying the man's name, and I don't want to give him any more space or time than I have to. His name is Michael Porter. On October the 15th of 2004, Radon met him at a Shawnee bar called Hot Rods. Now, Mike was the president of his family's magnet plant in Meeker. So, he was a pretty big deal, I guess. They began dating. I really don't have a lot to say about this scumbag. Court transcripts state that he sexually abused this baby to the point of a torn anus and genitalia. I absolutely refuse to give him any more direct white space or comments other than to say he's guilty and is serving time, and I will give you his sentence later. So let's talk about the timeline leading up to the death. Now you know the players. Let's talk about the timeline. Now, first, I got to give you a caveat. There are so many varying reports of what went down during this time that it's absolutely impossible to know what's true and what's not. You're going to have to kind of decide for yourself. In fact, even Judge Craig Kay, who was the judge in the custody case, was unable to determine who exactly was abusing Kelsey, because there obviously were several people doing it. So I'm going to give you the facts that I have concluded. These are just the facts that I believe to be true, okay? Prior to 2005, as I've said, she appeared to be having a wonderful childhood. She was happy, she was healthy, she was pain-free. January 8th, 2005, she's got a broken collarbone. January 9th, 2005, Kathy finds a number of all different colors of bruises on her face, arms, back, and legs. Keep in mind, this is Kathy, so it may be true, it may be playground stuff. But there is the broken collarbone, right? So, on January 10th, 2005, Kelsey went to the hospital about that. Why they waited 2 days is beyond my comprehension. I think that's abuse myself, but I digress. The medical team did find bruises on her butt, her back, and her thighs. And Radon said that those were due to the fact that Kelsey fell from her crib. I guess it's possible. Anyway, they sent her back home with her mother because they didn't really have any evidence, supposedly, that she was being abused. So comes January 14th of 2005. Lance and his wife took Kelsey to the emergency room with the side of her face and butt heavily bruised. And there's a link in the show notes that you can read the whole article about it. It's called hopeforkids.org. January 17th of 2005, a report was taken by the Oklahoma DHS twice in one day. And after much ado, Radon left Kelsey with her mother, Gayla Smith, overnight. January 24th, 2005, the judge awarded custody of Kelsey to Kelsey Briggs. Even more than that, Radon was given an order to take classes for parenting and anger management, as well as alcohol assessment. The Oklahoma DHS filed official charges and began closely observing, and I say that in quotes, Radon and Kelsey. Now, you notice Mike hasn't been given any of these classes or anything yet, so I don't know why. February 3rd, Radon did admit to spanking Kelsey on the diaper. February 4th, the judge leaves Kelsey in custody of Kathy Briggs, and he allows visitation for Radon. 2 officers at that time stated that they didn't believe that it was child abuse. It was normal child playground type bruises, they thought. February 10th, Radon's conflicting stories, denial of bruises, and no explanation. The Oklahoma DHS says, okay, we're going to call it abuse, and it's against Radon Smith. February 11th, she received supervised visitation with Kelsey every weekend and one day during the week. Supervised meaning by Oklahoma DHS. March 11th, so the whole month goes by. And Oklahoma DHS reviewed her custody and determined that she could see Kelsey unsupervised, but Kelsey was not to be anywhere around Michael Porter. And Briggs still had permanent custody. Now, again, all I've been able to find is about the Oklahoma DHS and Michael Porter. And Ray Don and the Briggs. Why Michael Porter was not questioned or any of that, I don't know. I don't know why, but that's the way it is. March 31st, Ray Don contacted the DHS because it seems that Kelsey was having a lot of hair loss to the point that there was a bald spot right up here in the back of her head. Now, it should be noted that between March the 11th and April, there's an awful lot of back and forth between Kathy Briggs and the Oklahoma DHS, Lance Briggs in the DHS, and Ray Don in the DHS. Everybody's reporting bruises that allegedly were caused by everybody else, right? More of a tit for tat kind of thing. On April the 5th, Lance spoke with the Oklahoma DHS and indicated his concern about Kelsey's bruises. And he said he only flew in that weekend, which is a lie, by the way. And he also indicated he was not a fan of the supervised visitation with Ray Don. Okay. Sometime in April, Kelsey again went to the emergency room. And at that time, the medical staff said she had 2 broken legs. They were considered as spiral fractures in different healing stages, and they considered this as child abuse. This fact became apparent when they had to do an autopsy after Kelsey's death, that is exactly what happened. When Kelsey became a ward of the state at that time, the worker asked her if someone had hurt Kelsey. Now, this is subjective, okay? I don't know this to be a fact. I was not there. This has been reported a couple of places, but it could be made up. I don't know. I'm only reporting to you what I have found to be said. So at that time, Kelsey said yes, and the worker further asked her who had hurt her, but Kelsey, of course, wouldn't say anything. The police and the staff asked Kelsey the meaning of hurt, and bless her little heart, she nodded her head yes and pointed to her 2 broken legs that are now in tiny little casts. According to Kathy, these injuries happened while Kelsey was on a non-supervised visit with her mother, Ray Don. But Ray Don says that happened when she was with her paternal grandmother. He said, she said, I have no idea. At this time, Kelsey's removed from Ray Don's house again and placed in her maternal grandmother's care, Gayla Smith. The court gave Ray Don visitation rights unsupervised. And it's been reported that she completed all those required courses and evaluations to regain custody of the baby. On April 18th, she marries Michael Porter. At this point, there was a lot of he said, she said between Ray Don, Lance, and his mother, Kathy, and this caused a lot of confusion. There was a period of time that Kelsey had even worse problems. Remember the hair loss, and she actually stopped eating. And I hear that she just lost her sparkle. She also started to show odd behavior, like hurting herself, biting, counting bruises, scratching, picking her fingernails and toenails. In fact, when she died, 1 toenail was totally missing. The Oklahoma DHS did document all the behavior issues and the loss of hair, and it's not really, it's unclear why she seemed to act differently when Kathy Briggs was around, but it was noted that she did. And it's also been suggested that she tended to be lethargic and asleep when Kathy would bring her for visits. So we're not really sure what happened there. But what is clear is that being in foster care and back and forth among the others was really starting to bother the baby. After this case was resolved, Judge Craig Key wrote a book about the systemic problems in the case, and he said, and I quote, "Although she was in protective custody, it was apparent that Kelsey was not adjusting to being in the Briggs home. A red flag was raised for me as a judge when DHS told me Kelsey's hair began falling out in clumps while in the care of Kathy Briggs. Kelsey's hair was falling out to the point that she had a bald spot on the back of her head the size of a baseball. She began self mutilating by biting her arms, and as clearly stated in Kelsey's obituary submitted by the Briggs, she was apparently biting the Briggs family as well. And there is a book, like I said, about it, and I think it is called A Deadly Game of Tug of War, the Kelsey Smith Briggs story, and I did link to it in the show notes here. So on May the 3rd, Kelsey again went to the hospital with two broken legs, and the Oklahoma DHS took back custody of Kelsey. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not sure if this is the same two broken legs that she had earlier or if she broke them again. I just honestly have no idea. It appears that she may have broken them again. So they took Kelsey back custody of her, and they gave custody to her maternal grandmother, Gail Smith, again. Judge Craig Key indicated that he was not sure who was abusing Kelsey. He just knew somebody was. And so he returned her to her mother against Oklahoma DHS recommendation. Later, we're going to learn that Michael Porter sexually abused that baby to the extent that she had ripped genitalia. Since the judge couldn't determine the abuser, he returned her to her mother, with weekly visits by the Oklahoma DHS. Michael Porter had a 7-year-old daughter, and she witnessed Kelsey's abuse. According to transcripts, she said that her father abused Kelsey to the point that Kelsey vomited. The witness said he was nice to Kelsey when others were around. June of 2005, Kathy finally gave in and gave up her right to supervised visitation. According to all the reports that I found, she didn't like what the Oklahoma DHS was saying about her. And so she didn't see Kelsey again until after August 19th. Now, on August 19th, a car accident further hurt Kelsey after 2 months after returning to her mother. Less than 2 months later, she died after Michael Porter punched her in the stomach. September 2005, there was a hearing scheduled that none of the Briggs family attended. 4 months after Kelsey's return to her mother in October of 2005, Kelsey died. October 11th, 2005, Ray Dawn went to pick up Michael Porter's 7-year-old daughter from school. Kelsey was sleeping when she left, dressed only in a t-shirt, because Ray Dawn said they didn't have any pull-ups or they were about out of them or something. Unfortunately, when Ray Dawn arrived home, Kelsey was in an ambulance wearing a pull-up. She kind of found that odd, she said, and she asked Porter why Kelsey was in a pull-up, and Michael Porter told her, quote, he didn't want people thinking things about him. Kelsey died in that ambulance, and her death was ruled a homicide due to blunt force trauma to the stomach area. The medical examiner said that someone punched or kicked this baby so hard in the stomach that it killed her. The indication was that she'd been forcibly sexually assaulted repeatedly. DHS filed paperwork between June and October that indicated the visits to the home by DHS had favorable results with no sign of abuse apparent. You really think that could happen? I'm seriously asking the question. Could all that time go by and nobody noticed that this man was abusing this baby? I'm not so sure. I find it appalling that the very last DHS visit was the day that Kelsey died, only a few hours before. At that time, Kelsey was with Michael Porter when the DHS visited, and it's been proven that Michael delivered the fatal kick or punch. The blow was so hard that it killed her. Kelsey's mother, Ray Dawn, was not in the home at that time. Now, there's a few rumors that suggested bad blood between the families, which there appears to be. But there are rumors that say Ray Dawn was totally innocent and that the reports were trumped up charges. I encourage you to make up your own mind and research the information about the case. I'll give you my opinion. There were terrible injustices delivered to Kelsey and surrounding her death. And we as human beings and as a society failed this child. In the end, I think the facts speak for themselves. Kelsey died on October 11th, 2005. She was at her mother and stepfather's home in Meeker, Oklahoma. The facts ruled by the medical examiner were that this case was a homicide from a blunt force trauma to the abdomen. And during this time, keep in mind, a judge and the Oklahoma DHS were supervising Kelsey's care. So much for supervision. Raydon, of course, claims to know nothing about the abuse, which I find difficult to believe. She probably didn't want to believe it. She did know that Casey was unharmed until Michael Porter came into their lives, that's for sure. I honestly feel that if a mother paid more attention, she would have found the actions of Michael Porter and Kelsey to be troubling, at least. And that same mother would have done more to find the truth and protect her child. So I don't think she's blameless in this. I do not. There's no doubt in my mind who the abusers were. I blame Michael Porter, who's a coward, and he raped and murdered Kelsey. And I blame her mother, who did not protect her. Now, I also blame Lance and his mother, because they were just so set on revenge that they weren't really paying attention to what was going on with that child. Now, there were charges. In January of 2007, the state of Oklahoma charged Michael Lee Porter with sexual assault and first-degree murder. Now, as a side note, the investigators also found child pornography on his computer. At that time, Raydon was scheduled to testify against her husband, but she was also under investigation for the murder of Kelsey. And her charges were enabling child abuse. Prior to the trial, the defense had that baby's body exhumed for a second autopsy by a private Indiana physician, who only concluded that Kelsey's injuries consisted of sexual assault. The forensic pathologist could not determine whether sexual assault or the blow to the stomach was the actual cause of death. The charges remained, and the official cause of death was determined based on the first autopsy, blunt force trauma to the abdomen. Now, there was an aftermath, and you need to know about this. Here's, again, they were charged. Both Michael Porter and Raydon were charged with the death of Kelsey. No question about that. And here's the sentences. Michael Porter, although he was charged with sexual assault and first-degree murder, due to a plea agreement, he was found guilty, of course, of a lesser charge, enabling child abuse. He was sentenced to 30 years in February 2005, but I understand that's to be hard years, or no chance of parole for 25 years. This means, though, that he didn't receive a death penalty, nor is he required to be registered as a sex offender. Personally, I think it's sad that he received basically the same sentence as Raydon. I truly believe he should have received either the death penalty or a longer sentence, like life in prison. A lot more painful than what he got, but that's just my opinion. The charges for Raydon Briggs depend on who you ask. I can tell you the final charges, but the beginning charges range from felony child neglect, which I believe, enabling child abuse, which I believe, or felony child abuse. She actually went to trial, and Michael Porter testified against her. He said that he witnessed her abusing Kelsey several times. Well, of course he'd say that. He listed 3 separate incidents, one of which she allegedly punched Kelsey in the stomach. I think that's a he said, she said, and I think that's just a way to get back at her. I'm not saying she didn't abuse the baby. I'm saying this, I would totally disregard Michael Porter's testimony, but you be the judge of that. When it comes down to it, I really don't care who's right on this. The bottom line is that 2 people abused this child either physically or by neglect, and she's dead. They both should be punished, regardless of which one actually did the damage. Now, is that fair of me? Probably not. But it seems fairness goes away when I'm talking about the abuse of a child, right? It's possible that Raydon hated Kelsey Briggs so badly that she couldn't see the forest for the trees in Michael's case. I still think she should have received the charges and sentences she did. She was convicted of enabling child abuse and sentenced to 27 years in prison on July 18, 2007. The appellate court has denied her request for appeal twice. Her sentence is for 25 years before she is eligible for parole. Now, the things that happened after the trials and sentences, some of them are still appalling to me. First of all, Kathy and Lance, I'm sure Kathy started this, filed a $15 million lawsuit for allowing the abuse and death of Kelsey. Well, it may be a good thing that the Oklahoma DHS had to pay or be penalized. I personally am not sure that the money should have went to Kathy and Lance. But that may be because I just think they're atrocious people. The way it was set up was that if the lawsuit was a success, half of the settlement would have to go to Ray Dawn unless Ray Dawn was convicted of anything regarding the abuse or death of Kelsey. In that case, Kathy and Lance got to keep it all. Now, it makes me wonder if that was the reason for the constant surveillance and reporting and, the embellishments or outright lies. I don't know. I think it was all a revenge case. In 2009, the lawsuit was settled for $525,000 by the Oklahoma DHS, and a private agency that was representing them paid an additional $100,000. Eastern Oklahoma Youth Services was the private agency, and they had a worker that was assigned to Kelsey, and she's the one that was present at the last home visit. Now, 40% of that, or $250,000, plus expenses of like $29,902, went to the attorneys. Ray Dawn did ask for a share of the remaining $345,000, but since she was convicted, she was denied her share. That whole settlement just makes me sick. Again, I think they should have paid, but I think that the settlement should have gone to some charity. I do not believe that Lance suffered enough to get this money. That's just me. Kathy also set up a non-profit for Kelsey in an attempt to pay some of the expenses, but the Attorney General eventually sent a cease and desist order because of misuse of funds. She was getting the funds and, buying things, and she attempted to misdirect the fact from her supporters. Oh, no, we're doing things, we're making things right. I'm told it didn't work well. And I've also read that Kathy and Lance were able to purchase lots of possessions and still be unemployed this whole time. Go figure. Now, here's an interesting thing that did happen that I don't know what to think of this. So, here goes. Judge Craig Key. Judge Key did not win re-election, some say because Kelsey Briggs' one-woman destruction show. She hated the judge, and she was going to make sure he did not get reelected. He did go on to write a book about the case that I've referred to, A Deadly Game of Tug of War, the Kelsey Smith Briggs story. The story was a bit self-serving in that he basically defended his position in giving Kelsey back to her mother, Ray Dawn Briggs. The book slightly tilted towards Ray Dawn and against Kathy, but the facts in the case still stood out. He went back to practicing law in private practice after his failure to be reelected. But some say he wasn't a very good attorney. Is that bias? Maybe. But in any case, trouble did follow him. In a bit of irony, he was indicted in 2012 for 24 counts of embezzlement, delivery of a forged note, conspiracy to commit larceny of domestic animals, and larceny of domestic animals. Allegedly, he stole a cattle trailer full of cattle. Oh, wait, and harboring a fugitive. Were the cattle fugitive? Oh, well, anyway, I digress. And according to the newspaper Oklahoman, guilty, he said, to each count of embezzlement, delivery of a forged note, and the other offenses. He further gave a couple of sentences about what he did, but he was given an opportunity to say why he did those things or apologize or something, and he just stayed silent. He was sentenced to 5 years of prison and 5 years probation, and he was also ordered to pay $527,000 in restitution, according to the plea deal. Oklahoman is quoted as saying he owes thousands of dollars more in court costs and victim compensation assessments. And that reference is in the show notes as well. Now, I cannot honestly say which of all of that statements are true, except the ones that I give sources for. And even then, you kind of got to consider the source. I mean, I thought Judge Craig Key was, on the level and had all the facts and knew what he was doing, and then this happens. Now, did the two have anything to do with it? I don't know. With each other, I don't know. But it does make you question, right? So there's so much misinformation and judgment that are given by others that it's really hard to keep up on this case. But what I do know is there are so many various stories out there about who's responsible for Kelsey's death. Some blame Ray Don as well, including me. Some think Ray Don is totally innocent, not me. Some believe Kathy should have received some punishment, including me. And Lance as well. Yep, that's me too. Every single day, though, kids are dying because of being abused. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the details of the trial and the people and the charges that we actually forget about the victim. And that breaks my heart. In the cases I review and write about, I always try to remember the victim and their families. But I got to tell you, not in this case. I feel there was so much blame to go around in this family that they don't deserve any peace. None of them. But Kelsey does. And Kelsey should be remembered as the center of this case. Not the Briggs, not Ray Don, and definitely not Michael Porter. Just think, she'd be 17 years old, getting ready for her 18th birthday in December. There would have been proms and boyfriends and getting ready for graduation. But sadly, this will never be, as she's perpetually 3 years old. But let's send positive thoughts and prayers that she at least is at peace. Now, I find it horrendous that a total of 10 child abuse reports were logged with the Oklahoma DHS about Kelsey over her entire life of 3 years. 10 reports, yet she died. The systemic abuse really frightens me that this could happen again. However, there is now a Kelsey's Law that hopefully made a difference. Little justice, but at least it's something. And I will give credit to Kelsey Briggs for Kelsey's Law. She pushed and tugged and, threw a fit and everything else to get it to happen. In March of 2006, justice was served by the Oklahoma State Legislature in passing Kelsey Smith Briggs Child Protection Reform Act. This act was developed to reform how the Oklahoma Department of Human Services and the court system handle these child abuse cases. Kelsey's Law went into effect on November the 1st of 2006. The law boosts the power of the DHS and the state agencies and judges to intervene on behalf of children in abusive homes. And it further strengthens the education of court-appointed child advocates to meet national training standards. What's more, and the interesting part of this, it holds judges accountable for their ruling in child placement cases as well. Now, I do want to add this part. If you or someone you know needs help, the National Child Abuse Hotline is open 24 hours a day with resources to help you in every child abuse situation. All calls are confidential. They can be reached at 1-800-4-A-CHILD, which is 1-800-422-4453, or by going to the web at childhelp.org/childhelp-hotline. Now, victims or survivors can also receive support from the National Domestic Violence Hotline 24/7. You can call 1-800-799-7233, or if you need the TTY, you call 1-800-787-3224. Now, here's something I find truly interesting and absolutely wonderful. If you cannot speak safely, if you're in a situation and you need help and you cannot talk because you're being abused, you can either log into the website, which you probably can't get to, or you can text "Love Is," all one word, to 22522. I think that's a wonderful thing that happens. If you're looking for some small way to make a difference, there is a campaign called the Stop Abuse Campaign that prevents adverse childhood experiences through public education and public policy, and they always need help. Their website is full of great information. You can visit them at stopabusecampaign.org or Facebook at facebook.com/abusestoppers. So, with all this said, I have started where, after all the sadness and all of the stress of this case, I believe we need to do a short meditation to release that dark energy. So, we're going to take a very short break and we're going to come back for our meditation. And in the interim, I'm going to put up the list of supplies so that in case you missed it. If you're not into the woo, feel free. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this session, and the next session we'll do our meditation. Okay? Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you listening to us and hope that it at least gave you a little information about child abuse of Kelsey Briggs. Please keep Kelsey in your thoughts and send positive thoughts and peace to her if you would. So thanks for joining True Crimes and Woo. We'll see you soon.